It's my pleasure to be chairing today's event on mastering emergency planning. Firstly, as you can see on the slides on the screen, I'd like to quickly run through a few housekeeping announcements, some of which are shown on there. Do please use the Q&A function throughout the event to put questions to our speakers, and the chat function to interact with your fellow delegates and to share any information or links that you've got. If you require any technical support, please do also post in the chat, and my colleagues will try their best to help. I'll try to quickly go through this section. So we also have a closed caption feature with subtitles, which can be accessed by all attendees at any time during today's event. If you just bear with me a minute, I'll just run through that for those that may need to use that facility. For desktop, laptop users, to turn on closed captions, please select Show Captions. The button will be labeled CC. If the button is not visible, please select the three dots on the bottom right corner of the screen. Then please select Captions, and after that, you'll be prompted to click Show Captions, so please do select that option. If you are alternatively using a mobile device or tablet, please scroll across the menu on the bottom of your screen and select Captions. You'll then need to click Show Captions. And again, once the captions are on, you can access a live transcription of the event. If you've selected the closed caption feature, please use the reactions feature, the next button on the right of the closed caption feature, by ticking the yes button. That's a green emoji with a tick to show us that the closed caption features are working at your end. If you're experiencing more general technical difficulties, again, contact NELC support in the chat. We'll do our best to help you. We do have a couple of other members of staff on here. After the event, we'll send you the presentation slides or any presentation slides used today, the chat, and any other useful information and links from speakers. And we'll also be inviting your feedback on today's event, so please do look at your feedback form, which should pop up on your screens following the conclusion of the webinar in Zoom. So don't rush off if you do want to feedback. We'd also request that when using the chat facility, attending delegates please do use civility and respect to and about all attendees when communicating, please. Unfortunately, we have had one or two recent incidents where that's not always been the case. Next slide, please, Liv. Thanks. Can't actually see the slides, but I'm just reading from this spec. So we'd like to thank sponsors, please, this financial year, who are Clear, CCLA and Blashir Illuminations, for their extensive support for today's online event, and the rest of them, in fact, to March next year. Moving on to the next slide, then, about today's event itself. So session title and speakers. So today's event will show us the impact of COVID-19, which has underscored the undeniable truth that local, i.e. town and parish councils, must always be prepared for emergencies, regardless of the cause. Fortunately, local councils are key players in supporting recovery from various emergencies. And this event provides a comprehensive strategic outlook on local government emergency planning. Discover today the crucial factors to consider, learn how to collaborate effectively with other partners, and explore how local councils can fully leverage their hyper-local or grassroots advantage in recovery and support scenarios. By attending today, you're taking the opportunity to gain exclusive insights into how your local council can proactively plan for and champion recovery in emergencies from an insider's perspective, complete with tips and guidance on navigating these critical scenarios to benefit your community, including applying Martyn's Law, which we'll hear about with Nick today, for potential local terrorist incidents. So, without further ado, I'm thrilled to be joined today by a brilliant panel of speakers: Richard Hood, Senior Project Manager at Communities Prepared; Nick Aldworth, Director at Risk to Resolution Limited, and has worn and wears many other hats too; and the now famous Jane Biscombe, Clark at Weymouth Town Council. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Richard. Over to you, Richard, to be the first speaker. Thanks so much.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and speak to you all today, Chris. It's really appreciated. So my name's Richard. I work with Communities Prepared, which is a programme run by the Groundwork charity, and it's very much based around creating resilience and preparedness within communities around the UK, and we're funded through the National Lottery. So we've done some work quite recently over the last sort of 18 months with different town and parish councils, although we're predominantly set up to work with grassroots communities, whether that's individuals or members within parishes and towns, your residents. And so recently we've done two pilots. One was with Shropshire Association of Local Councils, and also we did another pilot in Kent as well. And I just want to sort of set the scene for this as go, there is more different approaches and different attitudes to resilience and emergency planning than there is members within your organisation, i.e. that some of your members have multiple views on the approach at the same time. And from our viewpoint, we see parish and town councils very much as a bridge between the community members and the authorities who've got the category 1, category 2 responders, who have got the legal and statutory obligations to do something within this sphere. And so the parish and town councils that we sort of worked with, you've got some people who are very engaged already, very much proactive, wanting to bring in the community, wanting to create emergency plans locally, and also working with the local authorities as well. To the other extreme, where you've got some parish councils or some members not seeing that they have a role to play in this and feeling it is something that has been foisted upon them. What I would turn around and say is, with emergency planning, it's actually the small side of it. And if you move from the conversation from emergency planning towards resilience, resilience is about building the community and building where you live, your place and your community into something that is sustainable, but also it represents what you guys want to see in your local area. And I would say that's far more empowering and far more engaging for a lot of people than it is to go, we're just going to look at emergency planning. What do we do when there's too much rain and we've got surface water flooding, or we've got other challenges in the community? And the other side of this is to recognise the emergency plans or the resilience plans are written by yourselves, and they need to be about what matters to you, and more importantly, what matters to your community members. And it shouldn't be about what you can do, and it's almost like a power grab, so to speak. And please pardon me when I use that phrase, but it isn't about you and your the parish and town council's ability. It's what the community can do themselves, and what you're doing is helping to steer that and helping to tie that into the wider local authority approach. So it's about working with the community, working with the local bowls club, working with the local you know street wardens or the local school even, and seeing where their interests lie, what their fears are, what their capabilities are. Because if you can bring in your community, all of a sudden you've got people who have got really good assets in your area, such as the local tree surgeon, the local farmer with the heavy plant and machinery that might be able to come in and use the pieces of equipment to pump water from one area to another. You've got builders, you've got, as I say, people who might be first aiders or others. And so it's about recognizing their skills that already exist and the capabilities, and seeing how you can best leverage them. So it isn't necessarily about going to a local authority and saying, we want a grant to do all these sorts of activities in our local area. It's what you can do already. And I think the other part to this is to recognise, though, that the parish and town councils have different pains than the community, so to speak. So the community are often focused on the hazard and what they can do and who can do what to help them as individuals or around the challenge. Whereas within the parish and town councils, it often came across that their biggest fear or their biggest challenge to overcome is the aspect of liability. How do we work with the community members and not have the liability, or what happens if something goes wrong, i.e. what do we do about insurance? And the other one is there's a lot of confusion around GDPR. So if we're going to be holding information about vulnerable residents or vulnerable community or vulnerable locations, how do we manage that in a way that doesn't cause a challenge with GDPR? And what I would say is there is actually really simple and pragmatic approaches that can be taken from a parish and town council level. The difficulty comes when local authorities have different approaches themselves. And so the advice that they give can vary hugely. And so you can end up people with local authorities within the same LRF region being given different guidance on how to manage and store data under GDPR. For ourselves, we have a pragmatic view, which is you're holding it for a reason, you're holding it to use it, and you're holding it to share. And so the best way of doing that, and the advice that we give with communities, is keep the data in two separate lists. One is who may need to be contacted, and you could color code that to the nature of the hazard. So one property or one person might be more vulnerable to flooding, another person might be more vulnerable because it's a flu pandemic, or so on and so on. So you shouldn't have one list with just everybody on there. So you have one list with even a code name, and then a second list with the actual help and support that they need. So it's not necessarily to keep why they're vulnerable, because we can all be vulnerable for a number of reasons, but it's what do they practically need on a second list. So only when the two lists are brought together does that become a real consideration for GDPR, and that only come together when you need to actually take action on that. So it's quite a pragmatic way of managing GDPR from a really grassroots approach. So Chris, have you got any more sort of questions or anything else that you possibly want me to sort of discuss?
So, from the perspective of this event, Richard, that's fantastic. Later in this event, there'll be the chance for delegates to post their questions after Jane and Nick have presented and spoken. It is interesting, though, from this perspective nationally, that you say that GDPR's a factor. One thing we have picked up from this end is up in areas like Shropshire, for example, that particularly with regard to, and Nick will no doubt want to pick up on some of this later, anti-terror planning and civil emergency planning, that even some of the larger town councils like Shrewsbury, for example, and others, I know link into the Shropshire Council civil or emergency plan. So a lot of what they do, but they also benefit from that because they also at scale benefit from participating or at least observing some of the drills, etc., which the Shropshire Council undertake on that side of things, which they have the resource to do currently, despite Shropshire Council's financial kind of travails at the moment that Shrewsbury Town Council and others don't. Jane may want to at scale also talk about that type of thing later, but yeah, it's recognizing roles, isn't it? And I guess what the different size of local council, across the huge spectrum, even within the parish sector, can do, ranging from a small town, or sorry, a small village of 150 souls, say in Leicestershire, all the way up to the biggest of Northampton Town Council, population around 120,000 or something. It's a huge gamut, almost a mini principal authority, the size of St James. So I guess one question I would ask at this point, ahead of leading into Nick, I guess, would be, Richard, how you think, if you think um, the different inputs from the different size of parish and town council, across that spectrum, can can be kind of interrogated to help at scale communities in different ways in emergency planning. Because obviously it's a resource issue as well, isn't it?
I think that actually sort of, as you were talking, it made me come up with one of the points to mention, and that's the concept of community resilience hubs. And the idea of that we've got within Communities Prepared is that it could almost have a street or neighbourhood level resilience hub, and that is it could be as simple as you've got a shed with tools in, or resources, and you know where it is. That then
Mm.
scales to a parish level, and then you'd have several sort of community hubs, or you've got hamlets that are spun out from that, and so you
Yes.
tie into that. And then our vision is that then you lead back towards a borough level, and so on. So it is very scalable, and that's the point to sort of remember with working with the community, you can scale it and interact with it however you need to. And so you end up with cells that feed back to you as whatever scale you are as a parish or town council, and then you feed back up to the local authority. And so that way it becomes very cellular built. So years ago, I started off as a production engineer with cellular manufacture. So the concept is actually, based on that. But I would
Mm.
say that would be a very good way of working and thinking about it. But you just remember that you're one part of this bigger community, this bigger emergency or resilience community, and you have
Yeah.
a role to play. But don't do too much. Don't try to take on the responsibility of everything,
Mm.
but you have a role
Mm.
to play, and the role is that bridge between your community members and the local authority and the other category 1 and 2 responder organisations.
Mm, mm. And certainly that's reflected, I think, across a lot of policy and campaign areas that parish councils interact with and services they deliver. The notion of clustering with smaller parish councils, for example, with a budget of under 25,000 a year, for instance, to club together to, for example, fund either jointly a PCSO in other areas, or for example, traffic calming measures like an SID device, not exactly community, safety in this case, but actually isn't unheard of. And then also at Jane's side of council, so what we would call a million plus or super councils, and then the larger ones just underneath them on that in that pyramid, um, have huge roles to play with their neighbouring councils. We've picked that up, for example, in community transport terms, um, with one or two other councils in down Jane's Way in Dorset last year, who explained to us that they just with a community governance review were becoming bigger anyway, but they already had an arrangement to service and to arrange, for example, transport links out to their neighbouring parish councils that were smaller. So the same should apply, and from what you're saying, Richard, can apply easily in terms of the layering of emergency planning response.
I would say both of those are really good examples of what I would call resilience planning. And that is, if you think about an onion, you've got response is the core, and that's when everything goes wrong, you're very responsive, you go and help and you deal with the emergency. The emergency planning sits on the layer around that. It's a bit more preemptive, it's a bit more thinking about what could go wrong. But what we want to do is to move beyond that and take a holistic approach and to recognize what could go wrong. What can we do to make it, not try to mitigate it or prevent it from happening, but also to recognise what we actually want in our communities and what we value, because there's no point making something that we don't value resilient. We might as well take the opportunity to go, we really value, in the instance you mentioned, slower traffic. And so that's something we value, and that will have the knock-on benefit of reducing the chance of somebody being knocked over. It's going to make the chance of a car driving through floodwater and causing bow waves less as well. So if we move really forward into that and put in the calming measures, we're planning and we're making the community more resilient. But additionally, you can consider those traffic management sort of measures and go, well, what could we do here? We could maybe consider tying it in with a SUDS program. And so you can use layer upon layer doing that approach. Now, as I say, we've moved a bit beyond the emergency planning, but that's where the resilience measure ties in. It's that bigger picture, holistic approach to encapsulate everything. And so instead of spending £1 on fixing the problem after it's happened, or buying shovels to clear clear the streets because of snow or things along those lines, by doing the money up front, you're actually reducing the severity of the outcome, and so it becomes far more cost effective as well. And it also brings in the opportunity to bring in your community members in projects beforehand. So come back to that, understand your community, what's in there, and bring those in to help. So you may have somebody who runs a construction company. Well, get them involved to make some of those measures beforehand. It could be landowners to do with slow the flow and calming water flow as it's coming down through the parish, and that would actually enhance the aesthetic appearance where people can move around their landscape and their area, and it's more valued in that way. But yeah, I'll close down on that one. I'm happy to come back later and answer any other questions.
No. I think it's an interesting paradigm shift in terms of the way that people think about kind of almost future-proofing their assets and services, so that actually the kind of flooding that is on the photo behind you becomes more of a minimal prospect, or you're reducing the probability of such an occurrence actually happening. Not to say it won't, but actually, I think everyone, if I'm right in thinking this, seems to have a kind of it'll either never happen to us or rarely happen to us kind of mindset. We're talking about at the start, weren't we? I could be wrong, but actually, because it's such a broad kind of sphere, this, and it's just the concept of anything going wrong, any emergency, and planning to mitigate against any emergency, be it flooding, be it what Nick's talking about, terrorism, whatever, predictable or otherwise. If you are shoring up and making what you do as a council more resilient, less likely to go wrong, in quotes, and actually you are by definition halfway there anyway. But I guess, Jane, you might want to talk a bit more about that in a minute. Just a quick reminder, I've been reminded by my colleague that so normally we'd make this announcement kind of a bit later, but actually in the chair's notes it's always announced too late, so I'll announce it now. If anyone wants to post their questions for the panel, please start to do it now. If we could avoid statements, please, and actually ask short questions. It helps me because I have to chair this thing and actually read through the questions contemporaneously, which ain't an easy task sometimes. And then the questions can also be upvoted. So the questions with the highest number of upvotes or thumbs particularly be asked to the panel in rounds. Okay, so huge thanks, Richard. That's brilliant. And hopefully my questions back to you weren't inane, and that they were actually helped to prompt some questions and intelligent responses back from people far more intelligent than my statements have been. Right. So going back to the chair's notes now, I'm going to introduce Nick. Nick, it's over to you. I know you've got a slide deck that you'd like us to slide share, and Liv will, or at least you're going to screen share it, aren't you, from your end? and we'll be delighted to hear what you're going to talk about. Over to you, Nick.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And I'm hoping that you should have a opening screen there, reads an update on terrorism and Martyn's Law. So really interesting listening to the previous speaker, because it really brought forward something that I've felt for a long time. And so my specific field is counterterrorism. I'll talk about who I am and why I'm even here, what right I have to be here in a moment. But planning for terrorist events is emergency planning. And one of the problems that I found when I worked in the public sector is that actually councils aren't bad at looking at fire, flood and famine and those traditional risks that are writ large and come around more frequently. But they were very, very poor at preparing for terrorism and the insidious effect that has on our communities. So who I am is I'm a former public servant. I am the author of a white paper that has become a piece of legislation in progress. I'm the former counterterrorism national coordinator for the UK, which is a senior role working in government to make sure that our communities are strong against terrorism and are more resilient in the event that they occur. I sat on the National Security Council, which was a fascinating place to be. Sometimes, for the first time in my life, I actually felt like a grown-up. And I teach counterterrorism at Cranfield University. I have a number of qualifications to back up my experience. So the reason I put that out, I normally hate people who do slides like that, is because I suspect that most people on the show, on the event today, have got no idea who I am. So I just thought a bit of credential would be quite important. And I'm going to talk to you today. I'm going to give you a very quick reminder of the threats that we face. And I'm then going to talk about what is colloquially known as Martyn's Law, which is going to affect local authorities, very possibly more than it's going to affect many other sectors, and talk about the impact that may well have on you. So just to talk about what's going on in the world, you don't need me to tell you this, just need to read the news or watch the news. The world is a very dangerous place. Matt Jukes is the senior police officer in the UK responsible for counterterrorism. So he leads the whole of the counterterrorism network, which is about 9,000 officers working up and down the country, many of whom will be working in your local areas. And if that wasn't enough, only a couple of weeks ago, Ken McCullum, who is the Director General of MI5, reminded us of effectively the same thing. The world is a very dangerous place. It's full of terrorism. It's full of hostile states that really want to stir up the norms that we would love to live under and make it more difficult for civilized Western societies to operate and function correctly, with the intention of taking our eyes away from things that are happening overseas. That's really what this is all about. This is about making things difficult in the UK so that we don't get involved in matters overseas. I'm not going to comment on global politics today, which is a bit of a rarity for me, but time being time, we'll move straight on. But I'm showing this just to remind you of why we come to be in this situation, which is that the counterterrorism, the terrorism threat level today sits at substantial. An attack is likely. Now, threat levels are issued by MI5 in response to analysis undertaken by the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre, which is an office that sits inside MI5. And they take all of the intelligence that's available from MI5, which is our domestic security service, MI6, which is our international security service, GCHQ, which is our technical intelligence service, and defence intelligence, which is, as its name suggests, the intelligence drawn from our military operations around the world. They take that and they assess from that the likelihood of an attack happening in the UK. Now, the important thing about this is when it says an attack is likely, it means an attack is likely somewhere in the UK. Terrorism is not a predictable threat, unlike many of other threats that you deal with in preparedness situations. Terrorism is an entirely unpredictable threat. We don't know what form it's going to take. We don't know who's going to commit it. And we don't know against which target it's going to be levied. And so I implore people to take threat levels seriously. All too often I hear, oh yeah, the threat level is likely, but it's not likely to happen here on the village hall in Chipping Sodbury, or it only ever happens in big cities. It really doesn't. It happens in many different places, and we're very lucky we have a very effective security service that's very good at identifying and disrupting plots. So that's a mini rant from me just about threat levels. Please take them seriously, because they define the actions that you should take. And didn't take me very long to have a quick squiz around the internet, and there's more recent stuff than this, but just examples of the forms that these are taking. So in May, 3 individuals were arrested for a late stage plot in Manchester. A late stage plot is literally they're about to go out the door, acquire a weapon, or conduct, the attack that they've been thinking about. It is literally a goal line save, to use a sporting analogy. I'm told from contacts who still work inside these theatres that had that attack in Manchester taken place, it had the potential to be the worst terrorist atrocity that this country has ever seen. That will come out in due course in the court hearings that will come. More recently, on the 16th September last month, an individual from the extreme right wing was convicted of planning an attack against LGBT communities. And then earlier in the year, a young man from Liverpool with a very unclear and confused view of the world was convicted for preparing and disseminating material of terrorist nature. There are more recent ones than this. This is a slightly outdated slide, but the message from this is it is still here. And unless you live in my world, which I spend all day looking at this sort of stuff, I suspect it passes many people's radars by. And one of the problems with that is that's the point at which we stop taking threat levels seriously. If we're not having this stuff constantly in our sight, we don't take it seriously. So in response to that threat, back in 2017, the day after the Manchester Arena bombing, I was with my boss and we had a bit of a chat, and we knew at that point that the world had changed. Terrorists were attacking people that traditionally had not been in their focus. This was a concert ostensibly full of very young people, children. And throughout the period leading up to that, we'd often had people come to us in policing and say, look, I just can't get my boss to take this seriously, or I can't get my board to take this seriously, or what do we do? What should we do? And we've been blessed in the UK with having lots and lots of material available to us. The National CT Security Office, NACSO, provides free high quality information. The National Protective Security Authority, which is a branch of MI5, provides similar information for protecting our national infrastructure. But despite all those things being readily available, readily accessible, people still don't access them, people still don't take terrorism seriously, and people still don't protect the people that use their premises. And so we felt that the only approach to that would be a legislative one, and to create a statutory obligation for people to take protective security measures to protect people in publicly accessible locations. And hence Martyn's Law was born. The Martyn in Martyn's Law is Martyn Het. Martyn was one of 22 people murdered at the Manchester Arena inquiry. And it was only when his mother met me and we joined together to try and progress this campaign that we started to get any traction in government. Even as a senior public servant, I couldn't get government to listen to the need for legislation. It's amazing the power that a grieving mother has in these circles, as opposed to a seasoned security professional. So let's talk about Martyn's Law. It's going to be a canter through because I appreciate you've got a lot to get through on your agenda. The first thing to know about Martyn's Law is that it applies to both premises and events. And there are a few, if you like, entry criteria. First of all, the premises must be ostensibly used for public activity, and that's publicly accessible either by way of payment or implied access or permitted access. Those are definitions quite well defined in law because they define other parts of criminal law, such as burglary and other things where you break into people's houses. So the definitions are pretty straightforward. To be a qualifying premises, however, you must have over 200 people on the premises at the same time from time to time. Now, if anybody's been following this legislation, you might know that previously that threshold was 100, and there was no other qualifier such as same time and from time to time. It was assumed that things like fire safety regs and capacities inside fire safety regs would be the measure for how many people are on premises. That has changed, and there's now quite a varied number of routes to calculating how many people might be on premises. And the idea behind that was simply one of proportionality, where some premises have large floor space, but very few people actually using it. And it was felt that this was a much more appropriate way of creating proportionality. Schedule 1 of the bill defines the sorts of premises that are in scope for the bill, and that's that list of premises there. You'll notice that very many of those are public sector originated premises. Many, I suspect, are run or controlled by or leased by local authorities. The only exception to this is where a location might already have a specific piece of legislation covering it. The most common feature there is airports. If you go to an airport, once you get through security, you are protected by another piece of legislation. And then events. Events are slightly different. So first of all, it needs to be held on a premises that is not already a premises covered by the bill, as described previously. That makes sense to me. Those premises are accessible to the public or a section of the public for the purpose of attending the event. So that's a really important criteria, because one of the things that we in the campaign team had actually tried to push for was open air activities such as markets, fairs, Christmas markets, that sort of thing. But the legislators inside government felt that that was too difficult to create definitive boundaries within which the law would apply. So, for example, typically Christmas markets are not boundaried, and I can walk through the middle of one on my way to work, and it would be unfair for me to be counted as part of the footfall for that particular event in that case. So those sorts of those places are excluded, which is a shame because there's a demonstrable history of terrorists attacking Christmas markets, but there we go. And there's a reasonable expectation that there'll be 800 or more people on the premises at the same time, from time to time. So similar sort of definition to premises. The difference here between events and premises is that for events, it also includes staff. And those of you who run events will often know that quite often you have a lot of staff at these events. Catering is the one that quite commonly brings in quite a lot of people. And then, excuse me. And to create that definition even further of, this is an event, this is specifically for the people coming here for this activity, it's likely that there'll be people employed to secure and or check admission. So it keeps it completely out of this idea of getting mixed up with the general public wandering through. So you have two things there then. So you have premises and events. Now, proportionality is writ large on all of this. And so the government has come up with this sense of two routes or two pathways through which the law is implemented. The first is through public protection procedures, and this is called the standard duty. Again, if you've been following the legislation, these used to be called tiers, the standard tier and the enhanced tier. Pretty much the same thing, just slightly different terminology. So public protection procedures, and that duty will apply to premises that have between 200 and 799 people present at the same time from time to time. I'm going to talk about what procedures and measures are in a moment. And the enhanced measures for premises are 800 or more people present at the same time. So you see that also has synergy with events. There are some variations on this rather than exceptions. So faith and education, childcare, etc., regardless of how many people will be on the premises at the same time from time to time, will default into the standard duty. So let's talk about public protection procedures. Those of you who are emergency preparedness and planning practitioners, I hope will like this idea. This is about the requirement to have a statutory plan. Okay, procedures shouldn't require people to be buying doors, gates, windows, security cameras, any of that sort of extra stuff that costs a lot of money. This is about just having a simple, pragmatic plan. And I speak from personal experience in knowing that plans save lives. What the government has done inside the standard duty is it has defined a minimum standard of what should be in the plan. It is not beyond that prescriptive or limiting. There may be other things that people want in their plans, but as an absolute minimum, every premises inside the standard duty should have a procedure for locking down, evacuating, and communicating the plan both to employees and participants before an attack happens, but also communicating what to do in the event of an attack. There is inside the bill a term about which is the responsible person. That's effectively the person in the law who's responsible for making sure that the law is implemented, and the person who is accountable if it's not. That person should also understand the types and acts of terrorism that premises might be exposed to. So we're looking at the standard duty there. When we look at the enhanced duty, hopefully it makes sense. Premises of 800 and above are expected to comply with all of the requirements of standard duty, plus some extra bits. And this is where we move into public protection measures. And measures imply that there is much more of a requirement to take action to mitigate the risk from terrorism. And that action is likely to include some physical measures. Again, the government is not prescriptive around what measures are required, but they do suggest, or not suggest, they do mandate as a minimum these. So the first one is to monitor the premises or event and their immediate vicinity. Now, typically people will think of that in terms of CCTV, but of course it can be human beings. It can be other routes to monitoring the premises. It could be technical alarms. That's also a means of monitoring premises. Control the movement of individuals into and out of or within premises or event. Typically that will be somebody checking access. That will be some sort of access control. Again, it can be technical as well as human. Provide physical safety and security of premises. Now that's the one that people are probably going to get a bit twitchy about, because what that one really is about is those physical measures for keeping buildings safe. That is locks, windows, doors. It is blast-proof glazing or film on windows. It's lots of different measures depending on what your vulnerability is to acts of terrorism, and you'll see at the bottom there that the same condition applies here as it did with the standard duty, that the person responsible must conduct their thinking aligned to this specific act of terrorism that might affect that premises. The fourth one on there is an interesting one, and it's secure information which may assist in the planning, preparation, and execution of acts of terrorism. Now, what that really reflects is this sort of global phenomenon of we just want to publish everything and tell everybody everything that's happening in our world. The problem with doing that is that we know that most terrorist attacks have started from a position of online reconnaissance. Terrorists will look at your premises, they will see what they can find out about you before they even think about having a look in person. And we publish far too much information about our plans, preparatory measures, physical, detailed plans of where pipelines are and electrical lines are. We publish far too much of that sort of stuff, and it's all very helpful to our enemies. And so the law will require you to keep that information secure. Now, I know many of you, as I do, will see a real tension in this section of the law because with customer service. We often publish detailed maps of places to help people move around them. I don't see that as necessarily changing. What I see being is us being a lot smarter about what that information says. So we'll move on. Sorry, go back. Oh, sorry. Well, I guess where I think this will impact on local authorities is on planning applications and some thinking around how do we protect that information from hostile use. And then for that enhanced duty, there will be a requirement to document compliance. And I'll talk about the regulator in a moment that will oversee this. But the responsible person will need to have documents or records that show what public protection procedures they put in place, what public protection measures they put in place. And this is a really important one, the reasoning as to how those procedures and measures will remedy or mitigate risk. Now, the bill allows for an enormous amount of proportionality in the actions that people take, or importantly don't take, to protect their premises. The justification for that is what this is all about. It's many of you who conduct risk assessments across a range of thematics will understand that it's often the rationale that's far more important, and particularly in the public sector where we're held to account under the Human Rights Act, for example. It's more often a case of explaining why we haven't done something more often than it necessarily is why we have done something. So there is a regulator. The regulator is going to be the Security Industry Authority, who are a competent regulator currently around security matters. This is a completely different thematic, though. This is not about license compliance. This is not about training and learning compliance. This is about the effectiveness of protective security. And so they've got a lot of work to do to upskill and get themselves ready for this particular role. But what we need to know really about this is that, first of all, there is a regulator. That regulator is going to have significant powers in terms of being able to enter premises, as well as issue enforcement notices and improvement notices. And you can see there that the levels of sanction reflect very much those that you'll be familiar with through the Health and Safety Act. So lower level infringements, fixed penalty notices, but for the higher level infringements, really significant penalties, including criminal offences. But this is a point that I want to make that I think people should take some comfort in, which is it has always been the government's intention that the regulator should act as an educator first and an enforcer second. And so I think everybody would love to see the regulator never issue a penalty, because the regulator should be able to take all that amazing information that's available from NACSO and the NPSA and get people to align themselves to it and create safe and secure premises for people and events for people to use. And if we're working on the basis of educate first, remind maybe through an improvement notice, if you then still don't comply, you probably deserve the penalty that might be coming your way. But the regulator very much acting in an education role to start with. So where the bill is at the moment, last week it had its second hearing in the House of Commons, so it's making good progress. The bill secured pretty wide-ranging support, and you'd expect that because it was a bill that appeared in both the Conservative and the Labour Party manifestos. There were some commentaries around whether the SIA were the most appropriate regulator, and there were definitely some commentaries around the thresholds for inclusion. There had been a fairly concerted campaign from some quarters, particularly in sort of village halls and smaller venues, to not be included in the bill. And that's largely why the threshold was shifted from 100 to 200. Took out about 10,000 village halls in that one move. It now goes for Public Bill Committee. Those hearings start next week. That'll be a group of 17 MPs who will sit once a week over several weeks, and they will literally go through the bill line by line. They will take expert evidence at that point, both oral and written. And on the back of that, the government may make some amendments. Typically, at this stage, it is not it's not a free for all in terms of amendments. That comes after the report stage, when the Public Bill Committee have reported back, and people can consider what their final conclusions are. And then, of course, as you'll be familiar with our system, it goes to a third hearing in the Commons. That's generally procedural and will generally be a quick vote on whether the bill and any amendments are approved, and it goes off then to the House of Lords for that process to be repeated. Now, my personal view is that there might be some more amendments to come on this. There's certainly lobby groups trying to push for that threshold of 200 to be raised further. I mean, personally, I hope that doesn't happen, because when we moved from 100 to 200, it took out 100,000 premises in that one move. And really, the more premises you take out of scope for this bill, the less effective it becomes. So look, thank you for listening, and I'll hang around for any questions or take them whenever you want to do them, Chris.
That's fantastic. That's a really brilliant presentation. Thank you, Nick. You're really instructive to us as well. NALC and the SLCC, I believe, are going to be giving evidence to the Public Bill Committee next week. So you're absolutely right. And then my understanding is that they've got something like 3 weeks. Then the committee, haven't they, to sort of report back to the Commons by the time committee stages are due to properly commence. But that you're really instructive, and really hope that that's been valuable, as I'm sure it has been to everyone attending today. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so we'll take any questions, some of which are directly linked to Martyn's Law, Nick, in the round of questions so far posted. Moving on to you, Jane. Jane, the clerk of Weymouth Town Council, who'll touch on, I'm sure, elements of both Martyn's Law and some of what Richard spoke about in his bit. Over to you, Jane.
Brilliant, thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. Jane Biscombe, Town Clerk down on the South Coast, Weymouth Town Council. So great two speakers so far, and I'm going to bring us back to the sort of the ultra local, and we've got all this information, these new responsibilities coming through, these things we want to do to help protect our communities. How have we handled that down here in Weymouth? So usually you'll find me on the front line of our sector, waving the banners, shouting something catchy that probably rhymes about letting us take our seat at the table as local leaders and community advocates. However, in this instance, when we're talking emergency planning, I'm more than happy to sit back, put the kettle on and let others take the lead. But where I do see our role, and where I think that the town councils and parish councils really come into their own, is the focus on resilience planning. Richard alluded to this before, that subtle interplay between emergencies and resilience planning. And good resilience planning can make emergency responses so much easier for our partners and our communities to cope with. Here at Weymouth Town Council, our community emergency plan has been developed with the community with the purpose of promoting resilience and providing a local coordinated response to support the emergency services in a variety of emergency situations. The aim of the plan is to increase resilience within local communities by being prepared to respond quickly to and to aid recovery from local or wider area national emergencies. And we want to do that through the coordination of existing local resources to provide self-help within the community and support for communities in crisis. To help achieve this, our plan also details our support for community resilience organisations such as our flood warden schemes. Weymouth is flooded at the moment. Our community sandbag stores, first responders, organisations like that. By utilising local knowledge and expertise, we can take proactive action to identify and prioritise risks, allowing an efficient and effective response on the ground to help support our colleagues in the emergency services in reducing the impact to people's lives. Our community plan documents show how Weymouth as a whole can respond to emergencies, e.g. Awaiting the assistance of statutory authorities and emergency services, or in support of them. And types of emergencies might include pandemics, flooding, adverse weather, prolonged loss of utilities, impaired transport systems, marine incidents, and you will all have things very specific to the areas you work in. However, in our plan, we are very clear that it is not the role of the community or the town council to fully take on and own the full responsibilities of those other emergency agencies. So, for example, to save life, although we have our community responders and we have our first aiders, to not take risks to put themselves in danger, or for our communities, agencies, or the council itself to try and cope with major incidents for significant timeframes without the help and support of appropriate specialist agencies. So our plan seeks to identify emergency risks and community response actions that can be taken to support emergency services, help identify vulnerable people and groups in the community. And I saw in the chat people saying, well, I don't know how to do this. We've worked with local groups who do know how to do this. So we're not collating our own list. There's people out there who already do it, but we know who they are and we know who to go to. We can help identify resources available in the community to assist during emergencies, provide contact details for the community response group, key community resources for emergency services and our principal unitary council. We can help keep records of the action taken and decisions made during the emergency in any inquiry or any sort of what lessons have we learned. Record keeping is really, really important, and it's something we are really good at. And we look to how we can support residents and businesses to recover from emergencies. Our plan and our role in incidents are successful in Weymouth because we know our limits. We stay in our lane and we offer what we can whilst knowing when to step back and let others take over. Although partnership working means shared responsibility, shared accountability, in emergency planning situations, you let the best people do the job that they're trained for. We had an incident this summer where unfortunately someone lost control of a vehicle, drove that into an outside beach seating area. Thankfully, nobody lost their life. There were some serious injuries. Our beach team were on hand, and what they did was really crucial. They provided initial first aid until the emergency services arrived, and then they stood back. They did marshalling, they did crowd control, because everybody likes to film these things and be the first person to post it on Facebook. That's the role we did. We very quickly stepped back from emergency first aid to let's keep everybody back, put the signs out, do what we can. Now the experts are here. So we can help with those little but important things, such as providing rest space for emergency services, cups of tea, marshalling. And we can also offer valuable resources such as meeting rooms for press conferences, halls for emergency planning use. Temporary morgues are unfortunately in very short supply, and I will say it again, cups of tea. Never underestimate the value of a good cuppa in supporting our frontline services. If we can help fire and rescue, police, ambulance services have a cup of tea, look after themselves so they can look after other people. So how can we all plan for emergency situations to make sure that we are of best value to our communities and our partners? We can ensure that our own processes are well documented and fully understood. For example, our business continuity plans, how we would work from home if our office was to suddenly flood. Evacuation of community halls, clearing the village green for the air ambulance to land, and how people can contact us out of hours. Emergencies rarely happen between 10 and 4 o'clock during weekdays, in my experience. We can make sure our communications mechanisms and ability to update social media notice boards out of hours is in place and fully understood by others. We have strong links in Weymouth with our partners' communication teams, and we use our social media to amplify messages because in times of need, emergency communications has to be clear and consistent. Otherwise, the gossip starts taking over. And the key is to avoid confusion and avoid community concern. And we can do that by amplifying what's going out already. We understand the roles and the tiers of other agencies, our unitary council, our surrounding parish and town councils, the police, fire and rescue, the Coast Guard. Make sure they know who you are and how to contact you, and that what it is you can offer them when they have an emergency to respond to. And as I've said, we can audit local support groups and resources for times of need. It's not just the town council that has halls in the area, that has places that could be used for emergency services respite. Early partnership working is something I'm so keen on. Don't wait till it goes wrong. The time to plan for emergencies is a year before it actually happens. Early partnership working here, we really wanted to establish ourselves as a willing partner. We offer the use of town council resources. So we were recently caught up in some of the demonstrations with the racial tension, and our role, it happened on our land, but our role was, if you need to do a press conference, if you need respite, if you need this, if you need that, this is what we can offer you, police, security services, etc. That early partnership working means that we're involved in critical incident planning. So the recent protests, we had lots of meetings in the run up to that. We knew what we could offer and other people knew that. And so we can protect our resources and staff. And we're also involved in things like tabletop exercises. We had one recently with Weymouth Harbour about what would happen if there was an oil spill. And whilst we can't offer that front line, what we can bring is staff capacity and our resources and local knowledge. Local knowledge can be so important when the balloon goes up. And that early partnership working also means we know who to contact and are readily supported by partners when we ourselves had an issue. Unfortunately, we have had so far this year 3 deceased people on our beach, very traumatic for staff, but knowing who to contact to get what needs to happen happening quickly. And at least once a year, a metal detector will knock on my beach office door with a US Army issue World War II tank trap and say, I found this and I don't know what it is. That's always exciting when the bomb squad come down and start blowing up your beach, but we know what we're doing. It's happened before. They know what to do. We all know who to contact. If you've seen the film Dunkirk, you'll have seen what's his face from One Direction walking up and down our harbour. So World War II continues to have a large influence in Weymouth. So the main takeaways for me are expect the unexpected and plan for that. I know that sounds a little bit strange. You can't predict exactly what emergencies you will have, but you can predict impacts of emergencies, such as loss of electricity or lack of transport availability, inability for people to get to the hospital, inability for ambulances to get to you. So focus on the impact rather than the actual emergency, because you never know what's going to happen. I worked in an emergency planning department at a county council for a while, and I managed to draft our pandemic flu plan by calling it a zombie apocalypse plan. And that really gained interest and buy-in. I had some of the highest levels of partnership working for that, because you invite people to a zombie apocalypse meeting and they're there. And the level of innovative problem solving was really impressive, because we didn't focus on the zombies, we focused on how do we deal when there's no transport networks, when people can't leave their house? How do we get treatments to people? So focus on those outcomes and the impacts, not the actual emergency. Know your partners and what they can do and what they need from you. Say to them, look, ambulance service, if something happens, how can we help you? And really importantly, understand what you don't do as much as what you do, because that can help identify gaps. And that's something we, on a community level, can look at. Okay, where would we evacuate people to? If there was a major power cut, where could we allow people to set up a respite centre, beds, that sort of thing? So see how we can help other people is my main tact, and see how we can empower the community to help themselves in resilience, so that when it does go wrong, they've got ideas and they've got strategies. Thank you.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane. Really excellent. And ditto, Richard, and ditto, Nick. That's absolutely brilliant. And hopefully we've covered off between the three of you all the current thinking and latest sort of aspects of emergency stroke community planning, which I think all sides of parish council need to consider. Some of it principles based, some of it proactive in the way you described, Jane, and not reactive. And I'm sure everyone can take away something from the three talks provided. Now, listen, because they were so thorough, some of the talks, and because I've probably talked too much, we've probably got slightly less time for questions, but what I have managed to do is keep an assiduous log on the most upvoted questions. And I think if I aim for questions which perhaps everyone can have a stab at answering, there are 2 or 3 specific questions in there for Nick on Martyn's Law. That was always going to be the case because that's, you know, kind of a live bill in the Commons. So I'll try and ask a blend to the 3 of you. And I'll truncate, I'll kind of shorten the end of the event, so we're just covering off essentials in the last 2 or 3 minutes. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if we start with you, Richard, first, we've got a question from Siobhan, or specifically Siobhan's iPad. Who and how do you determine vulnerable people? Do you need to check that the person will want to be considered as such and receive the help actions that your council or group may wish to give? So perhaps, I mean, I think there were principles there that you could apply to Martyn's Law as well, you know, Nick, but I'll start with you, Richard, if you've got a short answer to that.
Yes, in simple terms, you don't. It is the vulnerability is the person. And so you create the opportunity for somebody to register or to let you know there's a vulnerability. You don't choose that they are vulnerable. It's the person themselves. So I'd simply put it in those terms. The other way to also say with vulnerability is very transient. And so you could be vulnerable to one particular type of event happening or outcome. And I just want to sort of echo the point Jane made. To make it easier for yourself and to make your emergency plan simpler, focus on the outcomes rather than the hazards, and then put an annex on them about how you would deal with it. So if there's people who need to have a rest centre, how are you going to deal with it if there is flooding or that was the cause and so on? But yes, coming back to the original question, it's not your responsibility to say who is vulnerable and who isn't. It's you're offering an opportunity for somebody to choose to ask for help and support under certain circumstances. For example, you know, somebody could be pregnant. Well, hopefully that's only going to happen for a set number of months. And then after that, their situation will change. Somebody may have had an operation and they're going to be vulnerable for a period of time following that operation. And so it isn't just about keeping it on a paper or a digital record. It's about people within your community knowing that and can bring that information to the forefront during an emergency itself.
Fantastic. Thanks, Richard. Jane, who and how does Weymouth Town Council determine vulnerable people? Obviously hugely community oriented. Does it just happen on a case-by-case basis, or is it built into any of your community plans or emergency plans?
So building on what Richard said, we don't keep a list of vulnerable people. It's not our place to. We have no reason to. But we know the organisations that work with vulnerable groups. We know the community organisations. We trust our partners, the police, ambulance, health, public health, to know and have those lists where they need to. One thing, really promote in your communities, the utility companies, so the electric and the gas companies, people can sign up as vulnerable. And so it's the electricity and the gas companies that have those vulnerability lists. They take care of all the GDPR. You tick the boxes on their website. This is where we can support vulnerable people, making sure they know how to get support, knowing who can help vulnerable people, and thirdly, making sure, and again, Richard put it far better than I, that people know where our emergency plan is on the website, how to, if they are vulnerable, help themselves. But we do not, and I would not advocate our town council maintaining a list. It's a full-time job in itself. It's a GDPR nightmare. It's a complete, not something we need for those purposes.
Understood. Thanks, Jane. In the final 6 minutes, I'm sort of looking here, and I think maybe the best way to split this is a question I can come back to yourself and Richard on in a minute. But I think there are a couple of questions we can do in the round directly for Nick, if that's okay, which are specific to Martyn's Law, which he's clearly best placed at the moment to respond to. I'm just going to ask you to answer these two, I think, combined, if that's all right, Nick. So we've got a couple of questions here. One from Wendy Amis, who we know, the county officer up in Derbyshire. Thanks for this question, Wendy. Will the responsible person, i.e. under the current bill, be the clerk of the parish council, or the council as a corporate body, or somebody else? I guess this is maybe something that might come out in guidance after royal assent. And another town clerk has asked, will Martyn's Law start to also come in for outdoor events as well? And how do you, I guess the link question is, how do you define capacity, for the outdoors, in a sense? That's something which we picked up on in our response to the Home Office consultation earlier in the year. Over to you, Nick.
Yeah, both great questions. In answer to the first question around who will be the responsible person, typically that will sit at director level. What, as you quite rightly say, Chris, will happen is that there will be statutory guidance will be published alongside the Act when it becomes such, and I hope that will become clear for entities that have multiple premises that might fall within Martyn's Law. There's also a concept of a designated senior officer, which is the person at that premises responsible for enacting Martyn's Law. They answer to the responsible person. So that, in short, it will be a director level that the responsible person will be expected to be held. In terms of outdoor events will only come into play where there is effectively access control. And that, to me, implies a boundaried event of some form. But very much, if you look at some of those big music festivals that occur up and down the UK, they have boundaries, they have tickets, they have access control, they have security enforcing that access control. Those sorts of events will be in scope. Your I don't know if Weymouth still has an air show, but your seafront air show at Weymouth is not likely to be boundaried. You can come into it at will without ticket payment. That would not be in scope.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much for those really concise and helpful answers, Nick. That's brilliant. Moving on to just, I think, one final question from John Barrett, probably to Jane first, then Richard, if that's okay, who asks, do we need to complete risk assessments for every eventuality? That's a question, not a statement, I think, but it's got quite a few upvotes. Jane?
Again, you can't predict every eventuality. It's practically impossible. So I would have plans for the impacts, and we're going back to what was said before. What would you do if the transport was compromised? What if? So you can only risk assess what you do as a council. You can't risk assess a meteor strike or something else. So risk assess what you do. Make sure what you do is safe. That is your legal responsibility, and then work with partners so that you can add into their risk assessments, their plans for what happens when a risk kicks off. But don't drive yourself mad trying to plan for everything, because you can bet your bottom dollar that the one thing you don't think of is the one thing.
Yeah, it's chaos theory, isn't it? You can't possibly everything. You just can't do it.
A lot on the rests on chaos theory, as we know.
Exactly, and it's something common to what all three of you have said across the piece here with emergency planning. Richard, final thoughts on risk assessments?
Yes, with risk assessments, as Jane said, you only need to do what you do as a local parish or town council. So that's what you need to risk assess. Anything more than that is a bonus, but don't get yourselves too hung up on it. As Jane also mentioned, and we talked about several times, focus on the outcomes. It's much better to group those outcomes together and to say what could go wrong, as in the outcomes, focus on those. Once you then move forwards into your resilience planning, you look to see how you can prevent power outage, or you can mitigate that. You mitigate the outcomes rather than the actual cause itself, because then you've got commonality.
Yeah, completely. And some of this has to be principles based, doesn't it? Given the different responsibilities, different spatial and scalable levels that you've all mentioned, and resource, of course. Fantastic. Thank you so much, all speakers, for your brilliant input. That's absolutely outstanding. I'm not going to, include one or two of these final subsections on my chair's notes because I think it was much more important to hear from the three of you with your respective expertise. And so it just remains for me to say a huge thanks to all of you